For more on the immigration debate, I'm joined by Leslie Sanchez, Mustafa Tameez, and Ed O'Keefe. Leslie is a CBSN political contributor and Republican strategist, and Mustafa is a Democratic strategist and former Homeland Security Department consultant under President George W. Bush. Washington Post congressional reporter and CBS News contributor Ed O'Keefe also joins us from Washington. Welcome to all of you. Ed, I'd like to start with you. The White House called its plan compassionate and a compromise. Do lawmakers see it that way?
Not necessarily, Elaine. I think the compassionate part that the White House may be referring to is the fact that they are now, at least, embracing the idea of legalizing up to 1.8 million eligible dreamers. That's people who are currently protected by the DACA program, plus others who maybe at one point were in it or have never bothered applying for it. That's about as high a number as you can get in the universe of people that would be potentially protected by some kind of deal. What others dispute when it comes to compassion is, A, the number of dollars that the administration wants to spend on border security, somewhere between 18 and 30 billion, depending on which proposal you're looking at right now. The other concern that they have is over the proposals to change the family-based legal migration, what some deride as chain migration, and it's the idea that a dreamer could keep or eventually allow for the legal status of their spouse, perhaps their siblings, perhaps their parents. The administration is looking to confine that as much as possible. It's a non-starter for many Democrats who say that you're now messing with family units, and that is a step too far.
And Leslie, there was no mention of Mexico paying for a wall in the president's blueprint. Does that matter to the president's base?
It definitely does. It's not going to be a talking point easily forgotten, especially because there are many within the Trump base that feel that it is the responsibility of Mexico to control their northern border, to help hamper this kind of migration that comes from the southern part, if not Central and South America, all the way through. And Mexico is much more critical against their undocumented immigrants that they have there, you know, with a kind of mandatory sentencing and all variety of different things that Mexico does. So I think they want mostly fairness, but they're not going to they're going to tether the president to that, I think, more than he anticipates.
And Mustafa, the actual deadline for DACA is not until March, so why push for a deal now and link it to government funding when there's already a timeline set for Congress to get to a deal?
Well, the president set this artificial deadline of March 5th. He said it himself. But look, we're a nation of immigrants that was founded on religious freedom. It seems like we keep coming back to these issues. These are not just political issues, these are cultural issues. And I come from the state of Texas, where we became a majority-minority state in 2004, almost 14 years ago. And Texas economy has done well. Texas still remains a Republican state. So when the president and his base bring up this issue about building these walls, it's not going to really change very much.
Well, Ed, these are really just suggestions, one could argue, from the White House. Is there any concern that President Trump would veto an immigration bill if it's passed by the House and Senate?
Absolutely, which is why in the Senate right now, which seems to be taking the lead and is likely to go first, supporters of immigration legislation are hoping to get certainly the 60 they'll need to defeat procedural hurdles, but perhaps as many as 70 votes. I remember talking recently to Lamar Alexander, Republican senator from Tennessee, who's been involved in past immigration debates, and he says at this point 70 would be a really good number to hit in the Senate, because he says that would signal not only to the House that there is strong bipartisan support for this, but it would be very difficult for the president to veto such legislation. The question is, what exactly is the legislation that could get 70 senators to agree to it? That's the big unknown. Certainly, legalizing the status of dreamers is one thing, probably some kind of border security, but beyond that, it's very difficult to figure out. And that's why you've seen Democrats and Republicans say, why not just focus on a more narrow approach, which would combine the fate of dreamers with some changes in border security, leave the questions about family-based migration and the diversity lottery for a more comprehensive discussion. There's no immediate need to address those. So we'll see, but hard to imagine that there will be legislation that leaves the Senate with 70 votes in this day and age, at a time when whether or not the House actually ever plans to take it up itself remains so unclear.
Leslie, you're nodding your head.
Exactly, because Ed's exactly right. In Congress's past, we would call that comprehensive immigration reform. You're kind of throwing everything in there, trying to get all the different things. Now they're talking about narrowing that. What's fascinating is it does have some compassionate component of something which conservatives don't want to hear amnesty. It harkens back to Simpson-Mazzoli 1986 when Ronald Reagan granted amnesty to some of 3 million people. And that's really been a scar for many conservatives who feel that that was where the party went wrong. So there's a sensitivity to that, but they balance the palliative effect is to say we're going to have more border enforcement. The combination of getting that exactly right is extremely difficult because even we saw within the White House and whether the president understood there are many natural borders along the U.S.-Mexico border. What is a really effective use of federal dollars for enforcement? There's not agreement on that. So there's still many gaps in trying to find this balance that's that narrow but has those two elements.
Yeah, I mean, what about that, Mustafa? How delicate a balance is this going to be? Because as Leslie points out, we really haven't heard it called comprehensive immigration reform.
We don't say that anymore.
In any serious sense. I mean, we saw President George W. Bush, for instance, spearhead his own failed effort to try to get what was then called comprehensive immigration legislation, and it was members of his own Republican Party that imperiled that effort. So, I mean, what is the difficult situation that lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are finding themselves in?
Well, look, this is a difficult issue. And any point in time, this is a difficult issue, and now especially so. So President Trump needs to provide strong leadership, and he's finding it difficult not to basically to stay on message. So if he stayed on message, and if he did what he said what he was going to do, he was going to take the heat from both sides. If he steps up and takes the heat from both sides and tries to bridge a compromise, something could be possible for the dreamers and more importantly, really for our economy. This uncertainty about immigration is dragging us down. It's the last piece that we have to address, and President Trump has an opportunity to do so, but he's got to be more measured and disciplined, and we just hadn't seen that from him.
And Ed, we've already had a shutdown over DACA. We're just months away from midterms. Is it clear right now who has more to lose if this deal goes bad?
I had an interview just late last week with Senate Minority Leader Schumer, who suggested that if Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell falls back on his promise to allow a vote on immigration legislation in February, and eventually DACA's deadline passes and this hasn't been resolved, he sees this entire issue falling into the laps of Republicans. That at this point, Democrats, having forced a shutdown in part over this issue, can demonstrate to those that are dreamers and those that worry about them, those that want to see changes, that Democrats have done everything within their limited power to try to get a deal. That at this point, with Republicans totally controlling Washington, it'll be up to them. And yes, Democrats definitely see this as an issue that will play a big role in several competitive congressional races across the country, especially in California, Nevada, Arizona, Texas, Florida, and maybe some northeastern states as well.
All right, a lot at stake. Leslie Sanchez, Mustafa Tameez, and Ed O'Keefe, thank you all for your perspectives. Appreciate it.